Are you and your partner doing the right things to make each other happy? Are you checking the boxes for behaviors of the happiest couples? Or maybe the opposite? Do you ever worry you're in an emotionally abusive relationship? Are you involved with a narcissist? And how about that word? Narcissist is thrown around so freely now. Did you know there's a difference between someone having narcissistic tendencies and someone having narcissistic personality disorder? But how do you know the difference? And is there anything you can do to change them or survive the relationship? Registered psychotherapist Kristina Virro is the CEO and founder of the Fresh Insight Mental Health and Wellness Clinic and is here today to break it all down for us. She shares what happy couples do for each other that unhappy ones don't. She shares the signs that someone you love or you is in an unhealthy or dangerous relationship. And she breaks down all the information on being in a relationship with a narcissist, either with a partner or even a family member, and what, if anything, we can do to cope. This episode will get you thinking. So without further ado, let's get to it. Here's my conversation with Kristina Virro. Well, welcome to the podcast. Today with me, I have Kristina Virro, who is a registered psychotherapist, and we are here to talk about some things I think that everyone is going to find really interesting. A lot about relationships and how to form healthy relationships, how to know the signs of emotional abuse or kind of trauma in a relationship. We're going to talk a little bit about narcissism, which is kind of like the big buzzword of today, but thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for having me. I love talking about relationships just because I always say that a lot of us weren't really taught how to do them. So
yes,
I think
I agree. Can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm a psychotherapist, like you said. I own my own clinic called Fresh Insight here in Markham, Ontario, Canada, if anybody knows where that is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I started my practice just by myself. So that was really interesting, put on my entrepreneurial hat. And thankfully we've grown, which has been really nice. And so now we have a nice team of us. And I make a lot of videos on TikTok and Instagram about relationships.
You do. I loved your, I'm not on TikTok. My daughter has forbade me, but I went and looked at your TikTok account when I was talking to you, and it's really great. Like, I found myself just watching video after video. Can you tell people kind of what you do on there?
Yeah. So I always try to make mental health resources as accessible as possible. So, some people can't make it to therapy or they can't afford it or whatever it happens to be. So I try to just give bite-sized chunks about here's some stuff that you can try. But I think what makes me a little different as a psychotherapist is that obviously I like to validate and empathize and all these things, but I also can be like a bit of a straight shooter sometimes, which I do just from a place of wanting the best for people, like if you're acting in a way that's causing maybe some issues for people in your life, then I might say, is it okay if I gently challenge you about that thing? Or is it okay if I highlight some observations? Because I think that's where really good change work happens.
Yeah, I liked it too. I just kind of found it entertaining as well. And sometimes, you're not doing something to be entertaining, but I just feel like the way in your delivery kind of keeps people watching, and they're short little snippets. So it's kind of like your daily dose. It's like your daily dose of therapy.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice. That's a good little tagline for me.
There you go. Yes, there you go. Let's change your bio. Yes, your daily dose of therapy. What made you kind of get into, you said for relationships, a lot of us weren't really taught about that. Is there anything else that made you kind of go down that route?
Yeah, you know what? I will admit I was not somebody who ever knew what they wanted to do when they grew up. Like, I had no clue whatsoever. So I went to school when I was pretty young because I had skipped a grade. And so I had just turned 17 by the time I was going to university. No idea what I wanted to do. I ended up pursuing journalism as a career first. Okay. So I got my master's degree in that, and I did some documentary films. And I happened to be on one that was about prescription drug abuse, which was actually, it felt like therapy, the interviews, because you're sitting down with people for like over an hour and they're telling you about their emotions and their life story and their feelings. And I found that people seemed to open up to me quite quickly. And I thought, I really enjoy this part of it. But then with journalism, you get your story and then you leave. So that felt kind of not great for me. I thought, what happened to all those people? Like, are they okay? And whatever. So then I thought, I'm back to school. I went and I started all over again. But I'm really, really happy I did. I've never looked back on that decision.
I love that story. That's a great story because, it's like you're hearing all these people's problems, quote unquote, and then you're thinking, I wish I could also sit here and help them.
Exactly.
And you did. That's awesome.
I hope. Yes, I hope.
I think you did. I mean, according to your TikTok followers, you are. There's certainly a lot of people who, do you engage with people on TikTok? Like if people asked you a question in the comments, do you engage with them or are you kind of busy?
Sometimes I get a little lost in the commotion depending on the video, but I try my best. And then, every now and again you get some trolls and some fun comments too. So that was a learning curve. But, I take it in stride now and don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's talk couples. That I was just saying to you. So I've been married for almost 24 years. And people always are like, what's the secret? Is there a secret? And I always say, I don't think there's an actual secret, but do you have kind of some tools that you think people like happy couples, like, is there something that you notice constantly in happy couples?
Yeah, so I can share a research-based perspective and then a clinical perspective. So I'll talk about the research. So it's really cool. There was this guy named John Gottman, and he set up what was called the Love Lab back in the 70s. And he had all these couples come into this lab, and he hooked them up to all of these wires and things like that. So it measured their heart rate, their perspiration, all this stuff. And he was actually able to predict with over 90% accuracy which couples ended up divorcing based on the information that he got. So
do you know what information he was asking?
Oh, yes, I do. So we'll talk about it. Imagine I didn't. I'm just like, I just want to
you're just like, it's just a study. I don't know anything else about it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what he ended up finding. So the first thing that he found was that happy couples do a lot of giving bids to one another. So here's what that means. When you're with a partner or any person, you sometimes will make these bids for connection. So what that means is you'll be like, oh, look at that really pretty bird outside. That's a bid, right? So you're sort of saying something in the hopes that your partner will make a comment or turn towards you, or you'll just have this little moment. So there's different options that we have when our partner makes this bid for connection. So we can turn towards them and say, oh, that is a really pretty bird. I love robins or whatever it is. We can kind of not really do anything. Like we might not make a comment back, or we just might kind of ignore them. So that's not really doing much. Or we can turn away from them, which might be something like, why are you so obsessed with birds? You're so annoying, whatever. So happy couples, first of all, they make bids for connection 20 times more than people who are in distress in a relationship.
I'm trying to think of how often I do this.
And you'll probably start to notice, like it's
I'm
funny.
definitely going to start to notice.
Yeah. Okay. And you might see that, if you've been married for as long as you have been, I'm sure that you two do that a lot. Like you have these little micro moments of wanting to connect with one another. So not only do happy couples just make more of those bids in general, but they also tend to turn towards, obviously, which is really nice. So it just, it tells your partner, and it might seem so small, but it just tells them, I see you, I care about what you're saying, and it matters to me, right? Which is what we all want in a relationship. So that was one of the findings. The second finding that he had was soft startups in arguments really predict communication. So what that means, a soft startup is when you bring up something pretty gently and compassionately to your partner. So let's say they did something that bothered you. You might sort of say, listen, I really want to talk about that thing that happened the other day because it's kind of been on my mind. That's a soft startup. So they found that if somebody started a conversation or argument that way, that it tended to go a lot smoother. So on the flip side, if somebody used a harsh startup, that's when you're like, you pissed me off so much the other day. You're such an a-hole. And, that's a harsh startup. Okay. And they found that, even if the content was kind of the same for a conversation, how it started really determined how it went and if it was productive or not. Okay. So that was another really cool finding. They also found that there are 4 particular ingredients in unhealthy couples, in quotes, I guess I'll say, that are common, that usually are a big predictor of divorce. So I'll go through those ones. The first one is criticism. So if you're having an argument with your partner, there's a lot of criticizing them. So character blaming, making these general comments like, you always do this, you never do that. It's about who they are as a person that you're criticizing. So that was the first one. The second was defensiveness. So if your partner says something to you, rather than trying to be receptive, you're like, oh, well, you don't unload the dishwasher, so why are you bringing up the laundry?
Right.
Defensiveness.
Okay.
The third one was stonewalling. So that is when you basically just don't give your partner anything. Like you completely shut down. You sort of ignore them. You're not really taking in what they're saying, it seems. And then the fourth one was contempt. So it's just this overall attitude of kind of disgust and dislike for your partner that shows up as sarcasm or name calling or eye rolling or whatever it happens to be. So if those 4 ingredients are part of your arguments regularly, then research will say that you are more likely to divorce.
Have you found that people who have those 4 components, I mean, is it something that is often pretty noticeable from the beginning of a relationship, or do those build over time?
I personally find that there tends to be a slow build for this type of stuff, which is why I always encourage people to go to couples therapy early rather than later, because that's the biggest struggle that I've had as a couples therapist, is that people will come when there's been like 10 years of those 4 things going on. And by the time they come in, it's like, you basically are a divorce therapist. It's like, okay, well, you clearly hate each other, so what are we going to do? But if you come at the beginning, like when you're just starting to see some of these repetitive behaviors, and that's where you can do a lot of really, really good work, because it's like, okay, we just get a little bit more skilled at noticing when you're doing these things. I'll point it out in session, and then we can do something more healthy, right? Because I think there's a myth that healthy couples don't argue. That's not the case. It's just that healthy couples have productive conversations and they don't do those 4 things.
I heard somewhere once someone say, and it was probably like, I don't know, Dr. Phil or Oprah or something, that it isn't about if couples fight, it's about how they fight. And if it's about keeping the fight on topic versus like what you were just saying, bringing up all this stuff from the past or attacking somebody's character, where you're just really, it's by the end, it's not even about what you actually started fighting about.
100%. I always say to people, keep it present, focused, and specific. Yeah. So what is the specific thing that you're having an issue with now? And what are we going to do about that now? That's the only thing that's on the table.
Do you recommend people go to therapy even when they're happy, like happily married?
I mean, if you don't really have any issues and things are good, I kind of take the approach of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like a lot of us do have our things, and a lot of relationships do have those recurring arguments or conflicts or discussions that come up. And so it's always a good idea to get an outside perspective, because sometimes it just takes a few of these little tweaks. Like, that soft startup thing is such a small thing that we can practice and do differently that has a really big result. So
what if both people won't get on board? Like what if only one person is on board with the soft startup or this, and the other person is just, is it fixable?
I struggle with that a lot, because sometimes...
Do you see that in your office? Where one's putting in the work?
Yeah. Oh, big time. And those are really, really painful situations, because at the end of the day, there's nothing anybody can really do if somebody doesn't want to change, right? It's just a really crappy reality. So it's kind of painful when you see somebody really working really hard and they're really invested. And sometimes I've kind of had to just highlight that of like, listen, partner A, I see that you're really trying, and partner B, I'm a little bit confused as to what you're getting out of this experience and what's going on. But there's really nothing I can do about that. I sometimes ask myself with those people, like, what's going on here? But also, is this a personality thing that cannot be changed? Because that happens too. Yeah.
Do you think that people should do therapy before they get married to see if they're compatible?
100%.
Really? Okay. I never did that.
I guess it depends on how open you are with your partner before you get married. Like, I'm very open with my partner. We've been together for almost 8 years now. And we had those really hard conversations early of like, do you want kids? Why or why not? But sometimes it really surprises me, if I'm speaking candidly, where I'll be working with a couple who's married, and then one of them will say that they don't want kids, and the other person didn't know that. I'm like, how did you know that? Yeah. Right. So, I mean, if you and your partner are having a really hard time having these open conversations, but you're thinking about marriage, then 100% consider going to a therapist, just so that you have a safe space to talk about these bigger issues.
Yeah. Are you able to, just kind of using like those things that you just said, are you able to kind of look at couples that come into your office and kind of, I don't know, just bet on whether they're going to work out, like based on those things?
Do you know, I have to tell you, I've gotten pretty good at it, which sometimes is disheartening. Because
right, because you're like, oh,
I'm like, oh, no. And I'll just say most of the time it has to do with buy-in, kind of like if somebody's coming in and I can tell, like you said, that they just don't want to be there. There's not really much investment in the process. I can kind of get the sense that they've checked out of the relationship maybe a while ago. Then I'm usually kind of going to a place of I don't really have very much hope here.
Yeah. Is it usually more men or women versus men that want to come for therapy with you?
So I'll actually tell you a common dynamic. And for anybody listening, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just saying what I see a lot.
Okay.
So a really, really common theme is that in heterosexual relationships, women will say to their partner at some point, I really think we need to go to couples therapy. I'm really not happy. And their husband will say, yeah, okay. And then they never go. Okay, it's been 6 months. I really, really want to go to couples therapy. Yeah, okay. And they don't go. And then the woman starts to say, okay, I don't really want to be in this relationship anymore. So then she goes to a lawyer and says, okay, it's time for us to separate. And then guess who's calling me is the husband saying,
wanting to go to therapy.
Oh, we need to come to therapy. I need your earliest appointment. And then they typically come in where he is very, very, very motivated. But unfortunately, it's often a situation of too little, too late.
Why do you think that is? Do you have an idea of why that is with men?
I've been really trying to answer this question because it is still a confusing one for me. I think part of it is just general emotional attunement. So what that is when you are really in tune with how your partner is feeling and you take it really seriously. And I think that women have been socialized to do that a little bit better because we hang out with our girlfriends and we have these really deep chats and we're sort of seen as being more emotionally invested in those friendships even, right? So I think we do that a lot more. Whereas, you know, I think about men and I'm not blaming them by any stretch of the word, but they've not been socialized that way still.
Yeah.
So they might not be as skilled at sort of reading the room or, you know, it might just be a situation of we kind of feel a little bit more inclined to take advantage of our partners because it's like, oh, well, we're married and, you know, I've locked the deal kind of a thing. And so I can sit back and relax.
She's mine now. Too, like men, I would imagine, and probably too, like in the older generations. I think the younger generations are probably better. But the older generations, it's like, almost, they don't want anyone to shine a spotlight on something they might not be doing. And, you know, it's nobody else's business and everything is fine. And they don't want to feel ganged up on. Okay, so if there was a woman listening right now and all the signs you just said, she was like, check, check, check. That's my marriage. I've brought this up to my husband. Either I'm scared to ask him to go to counseling or he doesn't want to go to counseling. Do you have like, I don't know, what's the best way to get your spouse to go to counseling? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah.
Is it going to scare them?
Anything to scare them. Yeah.
It won't scare them from being like, no.
Yeah. I do have some ideas there. Like sometimes what I'll invite women to do is say, let's just try one session. And if you absolutely hate it and never want to try it again, then we don't need to go back. So it's sort of maybe a little bit less intimidating that way. If you are going to go that route, just make sure that you have a consultation with the therapist first, because the worst case scenario there is that you go and the therapist has no idea what they're doing. And then the husband's like, see, this is why I don't go to couples therapy.
This is why.
Right. But so you can try it that way. However, I will say, you know, if you have a partner who is not as invested into the betterment of your relationship and they aren't as committed as you are, then that's something to think about as well, right? Because it is very, very exhausting to try to have to convince somebody to show up for you and care, right? Like that is not, in my mind, a very happy relationship.
Yeah. When someone comes to see you for an appointment, are you asking them, okay, what is the problem? Do you start kind of like, just give us like a snapshot of like a first appointment if someone were to come to see you for couples therapy, regardless of the issue?
Yeah, so I like to just first get some general context about present day. So, do you work? Tell me about your family. I do like to ask about their families of origin because sometimes you might learn a lot of stuff there that could be contributing to what's happening now. So if there was trauma in their childhood, that's going to be relevant. So I'll ask about that. I will also always ask about strengths as well in the relationship. So what are you doing well? Why did you want to go out in the first place? What keeps you in this marriage? So it's not all doom and gloom. Yeah. And then, we do sort of shift into talking about what are your wishes for your relationship. And because that's the thing, like usually when people have complaints, beneath that, there's some sort of longing that they have. So if you kind of can connect with that, it's a little bit more of a strengths-based approach.
So it maybe is not, he never empties the dishwasher. It's maybe something deeper than the dishwasher.
It does tend to be. However, I will say even people who present with it's about the dishwasher, we usually find an underlying thing that's going on that's causing them to be so upset about the dishwasher, right?
Right. Okay. Okay, so you said the bidding. I've never heard that actually, but in terms of like a healthy relationship and that making the connection. And something you said, or something I kind of thought of when you said that, was I thought about how often we're looking at our phones and that desire for attention. And like, I even know sometimes if my husband's on his phone, I will, have a thought that comes into my mind and I just say it. And he might be in the middle of sending an email or something. But if he doesn't literally stop like exactly what he's doing and turn and look at me, I'm like, for a split second, like feel ignored, feel whatever. And he's not. He was actually in the middle of doing something when I brought it up. But do you think phones have played into that connection or attention?
Yes. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Big time. It's actually been surprising and not surprising. I say that because I'm not surprised that, phones influence our lives, but the degree to which they've started to affect relationships has been concerning. Yeah. So, because it's also not just the phones, I think it's also a lot of couples get into this habit of they'll just finish work and then watch TV together and be on their phones while they're watching TV. So it's like 2 degrees of disconnection going on there.
Makes me crazy. Yes. I'm like, pick a volume, pick one noise, TV or phone. I don't care what it is. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. So I actually do encourage a lot of couples to just have no phone time. Even if you're watching TV, at least put your phone away so that you're engaging in the show together and you're having conversations. Yeah. Make sure that you put your phone away and sit down to have a dinner before you bring it in front of the TV together. Yeah. And, they sound small and simple, but they really do accumulate because if you have a really nice dinner with your partner at home where you don't have your phones and you just say, how was your day? And you give them your undivided attention. Yeah. That is a true gift to your partner.
It is a gift.
So good, right?
Yeah. I saw something about like, even if you were having dinner with someone and your phone was even on the table, like even if you weren't using it, but just your phone being on the table signals to them, like, this is my priority. If this goes, I'm taking it. So be prepared to be interrupted and just things like you don't think about because you don't mean any harm by doing it. I'm not trying to not pay attention to you. But that's how you receive it. And it's interesting to me when you said that about watching TV and the phones, because my husband and I, we like to watch TV a lot together, or we'll have like a show that we'll watch, kind of we'll go through phases. But when you said that, like, I can think like if he, gets a text or he gets a ding and he picks up his phone, I will feel that like, put down your phone and watch TV with me. Even though we're not having a deep conversation, it's still bothersome that I want him engaged in that TV show with me. Yeah. So it's funny when you just said that.
Yeah. What my partner and I do is we'll say, are we background watching or are we watching? And if we're background watching,
like that.
It means, okay, go on your phone. I also crochet. So it's like, okay, I'll crochet and la. But if we're watching, it means like no phone and no interruptions.
I like that. I feel like that when he watches like soccer. He watches and I'm background watching. But he's fine with that because I'm not asking him to change the channel. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yes. But then it's like at least
I'm going to start using that.
Expectation.
Yeah. Watching. And especially to like setting that example for your children.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. What are some signs and again, you probably are like, you're probably feeling it already, but what are some signs that you are maybe not in the best relationship? Whether it's just dating, whether you've been married for a year, married 5 years, are there kind of like some, as from like a therapy point of view, kind of those big red flags that you're like, this is headed for trouble?
Yeah. So outside of those 4 things that we talked about of like the defensiveness, the criticism, the stonewalling, and the, criticism. Did I mention that one?
Criticism. Okay. Criticism, stonewalling. Yep.
Yeah. So
soft approach.
Yeah. So outside of those 4 things and like the things not to do, I think if you're in an unhealthy relationship, there's actually a lot of loneliness. You just feel like you kind of have your own life. You might keep things to yourself rather than sharing them. Feels like you're just kind of going it alone is probably something to pay attention to, of why am I feeling this way, and what is my partner doing that might be contributing to that.
Yeah.
And also, like we were talking about, if you constantly feel like you're giving and trying and you're never getting that back, there's probably a real feeling of just deep fatigue, of why am I trying so hard and it feels like I'm just talking to a brick wall of never really being considered.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny because when I asked you that question, I thought your answer was going to be, well, if they're like yelling at you, or if they're calling you names, or if something like, if they're saying X, Y, Z. I didn't expect you to say if you feel lonely.
Well, I mean, and what you're talking about too is like super concerning as well. Like that's when we're going to a place of, even if there's yelling, if there's name calling, if there's humiliation, if there's any physical abuse of any kind, obviously that's a sign that we're not in a good relationship. But I just wouldn't have thought
of loneliness at the top of like being a red flag. But I think, you're right. If you're like in a relationship and yet you still feel alone, then actually just I filmed a podcast the other day, and it was on someone who had been divorced and remarried, and said that when her kids would leave to go back to her ex-husband, she was sitting on the sofa with her new husband. She said, I was like, no, like my kids were my distraction. And when they left, she said, I was so lonely and he was sitting on the couch next to me. And I just thought I would rather be physically by myself than be with him and still feel this lonely. So I never, that's twice now this week I've heard that as a red flag.
Yeah, because it's also just very painful, right? It's very, very painful when you feel rejected all the time, even if it's in these tiny ways, like even if you're trying to connect and they don't really turn towards you, or if they're always on their phone, or they're not really engaging with you, or they're not really showing interest. It's just a very, very painful experience.
Mm-hmm. Are there signs from a more kind of emotional abuse? Obviously, physical abuse is apparent to what that is. But from that kind of emotional abuse, which I think is really kind of hard to identify for a lot of people, and they make excuses for it, or they make excuses for him, versus if it was like a physical bruise, it would be hard to kind of pass that off. But are there kind of signs that you could kind of maybe help someone justify, like, yes, this is a problem if your partner's treating or saying kind of these things to you?
Oh, absolutely. So for anybody listening, or I don't know if you have show notes or whatever, but
I will have show notes for sure.
Great. So there is an amazing resource to Google called the Power and Control Wheel. And what it does is it outlines a lot of the different signs of emotional abuse, and I'll explain some of them. So what's important to keep in mind with any abusive behavior, but including emotional abuse. So I would define emotional abuse as any tactics that are designed to destroy the psychological well-being of somebody using non-physical means, all in the spirit of gaining power or control over them. Okay. So if you look at that power and control wheel, it will say things like, okay, using intimidation, being coercive, gaslighting, calling names, whatever. What's concerning about that list is you might look at it and say, I've actually done some of these things. Like sometimes when I look at my partner and I'm really mad, I might say something I don't mean. But it is not considered emotionally abusive unless there is this desire to control and coerce and have power over, right? So for example, like I've worked with people who they might be immigrants in Canada, and then their partner will say, oh, well, I have all your immigration papers, so don't you mess up. So that's very psychologically terrible, right? You are threatening them. You are being coercive with them. You are trying to gain control over them through that tactic. So that's the difference. It's like you want to do things so that your partner's sense of self and identity is completely shattered.
Are there signs when you were, say, just dating somebody, or even like for a mom listening and her daughter maybe is, starting to date boys, and are there kind of signs that they should be looking for, you should be looking for in that new relationship, like before they're comfortable? Like, are there kind of telltale signs?
Absolutely. So I think just to put this out there, there's a difference between an unhealthy person and emotional abuse, right? So for something to be emotionally abusive, like I said, it has to be that kind of ongoing pattern of trying to gain power and control over somebody. So it's not really, it's like not like a one and done, right? It's this pervasive, intentional strategy to really break down that person's psyche and well-being. So that's emotional abuse. But absolutely, in terms of like what are just general red flags of an unhealthy person, I work with a lot of women and young women who are dating, or anybody who's dating. I always kind of invite them to just not like start a fight or anything, but just set a limit and just to see how the person reacts. So for example, if you sort of say, actually, I don't want to do that movie. I want to do a different movie that you might suspect that they really don't want to see. It gets like a tiny little test if you're starting to
it's not like a huge start a fight. It's like a little tiny thing. Something that should be little.
Something that should be little, exactly. And you just sort of see how they react, because sometimes there's these horrific reactions people will get of like, oh, you're so demanding. I can't believe you would ask me to come pick you up at the last minute or something like that. And that's where you'll see some of those true colors. But I think if you are with somebody who just puts you down quite a bit, whether it's overtly or kind of more subtly, that's always a red flag. Somebody who's defensive as well, big red flag. Somebody who just sort of has that air of superiority or entitlement, I would always say is quite a red flag as well. Whether that's feeling entitled to your time or entitled to your body or whatever it happens to be.
Like controlling over like the friends you see, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Jealousy, intense jealousy. Yeah. But I think actually it's really interesting to me, because most of the time women who have left an abusive relationship, I tend to ask them, did you ever kind of feel like things were off? And 100% of the time I've heard them say yes. So if you're on, I know this is a very simple thing to say, but if you're on a date and you just have that spidey sense that this is not an okay person, just listen to it, because I think a lot of women will sort of try to find explanations or try to give the benefit of the doubt or whatever. But if you're sitting there and you're like, I just don't get a good vibe, trust your instincts.
Yeah. Okay. Do you ever, when we're talking about like things that are good in relationships, and I often wonder if you've gotten to a point, let's say you've been married for 4 or 5 years, and you're like, this is just not kind of how I thought it was going to be. Maybe you have some of these red flags that we talked about. Have you seen couples bring it back around? Like, is it possible to kind of get back to where you were, or could you kind of get to a point where it's too far gone?
I've sort of seen both, to be honest, but I think you can get back there so long as you have two people who are willing to do that work. Because I think the main shift that happens there is just some intentionality, right? Yeah. So even like we were talking about before, of instead of I go sit down on the couch and I would turn on my phone and I text and while we watch TV, you're just way more intentional about that time of saying, we're going to sit down, I'm going to give you my attention. So that's really the biggest shift. And you just need two people who are willing to do that. And if you have that, if you have motivated people, I think you can do so much good work.
Yeah. Kind of, I think sometimes people chase that feeling of like they want to have back when they were dating, like at the beginning, and then they start getting into, the routine of marriage and kids and bills and the real world and all that stuff, and then think, well, this isn't what it used to be, so I'm jumping ship, it seems like. I don't know, I've kind of heard a few people say that. Like, I just want it to be how it was in the beginning. I don't know if that's, I think probably you have your ups and downs and your highs and lows for that. But yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. Okay, something I want to ask you about, and I know I was saying this to you earlier, the term narcissist seems to be everywhere, right? Like it's, I don't know, I seem to see it all over social media or books or talks about it, or you hear people say, oh, my husband's a narcissist, my ex-husband's a narcissist. And I'm curious to think if you think it's overused, and if you could maybe tell us like really what a true narcissist is.
Yes, I 100% think it is overused, and it's
okay, you do.
Yes, because it's really funny. I feel like this movement around being more aware of mental health has been so positive. Mm-hmm. The one thing I've seen that's not my favorite is the kind of taking these really important terms and just using them. Like trigger is another one. Narcissist is another one. Everybody's triggered. Gaslighting. Yeah. And it kind of makes me sad because I think it can be really invalidating to people who have actually been gaslit and actually know a narcissist. But I did look it up the other day, funny enough, and the term narcissist, according to Google Trends, has doubled in terms of search since 2015. So it's not just us who think it's...
Yes. Okay. Other people are actually doing it too. Okay.
Yeah. So I can explain. So I think what most people mean when they're saying they know a narcissist is somebody who's narcissistic, right? So that's somebody who's pretty self-involved and kind of arrogant and maybe quite a bit of a jerk. But there's a really big difference between somebody who's a narcissist and somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder. Okay. And there's a whole list of criteria that you have to meet for that. Okay. So just before I say what those are, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm not legally allowed to diagnose anybody, but I can say what the criteria are just for education. No, So there's something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. There's a 5th edition of it. It's used by psychiatrists for diagnosing. So this is what I'll be referencing. So the general definition of somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is it's a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. But they go on to actually say there's 9 criteria, and somebody would have to meet at least 5 of these criteria for an extensive period of time. We're not talking like a week. It has to be at least 6 months, and these behaviors have to occur across contexts. So, these traits are present pretty much across the board for a long period of time. Okay. So what some of those are, so we've talked about the first 3 in that general definition. So it's this grandiose attitude. So there's this really exaggerated sense of self-importance and like, oh, I'm so talented and I'm so accomplished, even though they might not actually have the evidence to back that up. They still think that of themselves. There's this excessive need for admiration. So they really want everybody to think that they're the shit. They want everybody to put them on a pedestal. They want to be the best, seen as the best of the best. There's a lack of empathy for other people. The 4th would be that relationally, they're very exploitative. So relationships are very transactional. It's all about how does this person help me meet my own goal or help me with my own agenda. They tend to be very envious of other people who do have the status that they want, or they think that those people are envious of them. Again, even if they don't really have the credentials or anything to back that up, there's this preoccupation with success and brilliance and status and power and being seen in that way all the time. There tends to be a lot of arrogant behavior, a lot of entitlement. And so you see all of these traits. But again, when we're talking about an actual diagnosis, it has to be outside of the scope of healthy functioning. So what I mean by that is, let's say somebody feels a bit depressed from time to time, but overall, they're still functioning pretty well. Like it's not getting in the way of their social life. It's not getting in the way of work. It's not getting in the way of being a mom. They probably wouldn't get a diagnosis because we're saying, okay, there aren't really any consequences to this yet. We hope it doesn't continue. And you're still sort of like functioning pretty healthily overall. But for somebody to get a personality disorder diagnosis, they would have to start really experiencing these consequences in their life, and they'd have to be quite severe. So we're not just talking about somebody who's kind of entitled. We're talking about somebody who genuinely believes that they are owed everything and anything whenever they want. So it's like, take those narcissistic traits and amplify them, and that's probably when somebody would get a diagnosis.
And so my big question is, if someone has all those things, what are the chances that they truly believe something is wrong with them and they need to have a diagnosis? Like, are they actually walking in to a doctor's office and saying, look, I'm really self-entitled. I believe that I am owed everything?
Oh gosh, no. So most narcissists wouldn't be
diagnosing them. Yeah. Behind their backs, maybe family member, spouse.
Yes, you're probably right. Those are the people making the calls, actually. But most narcissists really lack a lot of awareness. Okay. What the research tells us is that they mainly pursue therapy because of some other reason, not anything to do with narcissism. So, for example, substance abuse tends to coexist with narcissism quite a bit, actually. So they might go to therapy being like, oh, I have a substance abuse issue, but narcissism is like absolutely not on their radar. Okay. You know? But even then, it's very likely that somebody with NPD would probably fire a therapist very quickly, because they'd be like, well, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm so smart. You know? Yes.
That's because when you were saying all that, I was like, they're never walking in. Because what is if someone gets a diagnosis, what is the treatment?
You can't, like, you could in theory treat somebody with NPD, and, you know, there are some people who have done it, but it just takes an extremely motivated and committed person, because, I mean, it's kind of like any habit that you're trying to break, right? Like, let's say you have an addiction and it's okay, let's become more aware of when you want to use substances and what you're going to do differently. Yeah. With a narcissist, it would just be, let's be more aware of when you're wanting to manipulate people, and how are you going to know that you're doing it, and what are you going to do differently. But what I always sort of say is that it's not, self-improvement is not really in the value system of a narcissist. Like, they don't care.
They don't think they need it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like they want fame, they want fortune, they want power, they want status. It's not like they're waking up in the morning and being like, I want to be better in life. Like, that's just not how it's going. And so how on earth would you convince them to feel like that's an important thing to do?
Is someone born with narcissistic personality disorder, or is that something you would acquire through life?
Yeah. So interestingly, the research tells us that it has the highest genetic inheritability of other personality disorders. So, for example, something like borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, you are more likely to inherit genetically. Okay. But there's two theories in terms of the nurture camp, because I'm more inclined to think it has to do with that. Okay. The first theory is that somebody has experienced some sort of childhood trauma, and this is their coping mechanism of sort of making themselves amazing and, you know, hyping themselves up. The second thing that can happen is that you have a parent who set no boundaries for you and actually helped to inflate your sense of self, which I've worked with people like that too, not very many, but they didn't have any limits growing up. They could kind of get away with whatever they wanted. And so they still act like that in adulthood. It's like, oh, well, I should be able to do whatever I want. And that's not how the world works. So they end up having a lot of problems. But.
Yeah. Would it be possible for someone to marry a narcissist and not know it? Like, are narcissists able to kind of be on their best behavior or hide those kind of bad behaviors from somebody? Like, could you marry a narcissist and not know?
1,000%, because there's actually a very predictable pattern that most narcissists follow in relationships.
Oh, can you share what that is?
I absolutely can.
Everyone's like turning up their volume. They're like, oh, mom needs a minute. Hold on. Let me listen.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So the first phase is what's called the love bombing phase. And this is why it's so easy to fall in love with them, because this is the phase where it's all about making their partner feel special and important and like the only person in the world. And so they'll do that through maybe gift giving. So giving them these really extravagant gifts, just giving them so much attention, just sending them love notes. You know, it's so over the top and you are my everything and all this stuff. And what that communicates to the person on the receiving end of that is, this person is so interested in me and I'm so special. And that tends to create a little bit of a feeling of loyalty, right? Because it's like, wow, they've invested so much time and money and energy into me and I can't let them go. This feels so good. They're so in love with me. And, it's pretty common that narcissists will try to close the deal really early with somebody. Okay. So typically they go for people who they think are doing something for them. So for example, they might go after a really successful woman because they're like, oh, she has money, she has power, she has status, and that's going to make me look really, really good.
Okay. So they're not typically going for like the kind of weak little bird almost. Like they want someone that can elevate them.
Well, they can go after the weak bird. Like it's funny because every narcissist might have a little bit of a different motive of, so if the weak bird actually makes me feel really powerful, they might like that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So, or it could go the opposite way of, oh, well, this really successful woman makes me feel really hot and amazing and everybody's jealous of me.
Right.
So it could kind of go either way, but typically they'll try to sort of lock that down. The person on the receiving end of that, I'm going to start calling them the victim, is like, oh, wow, this is the best relationship I've ever been in. So that's phase one.
Yeah.
Phase two is when we go to the devaluation phase. So this is, okay, now I'm going to start chipping away at this person and just slowly bring him down. So that's when you start to see the gaslighting, the
Can you tell what gaslighting is for people who don't know it?
Yeah. So gaslighting, again, so sort of like I was talking about with emotional abuse, you can't just like say a comment and be a gaslighter. That's not what we're talking about. Okay. It's a long-standing pattern of trying to slowly and systematically cause somebody to completely question their reality. So it's a long-term strategic thing, you know, it's like
not making you think like you're the one that's crazy. I don't have the problem.
Exactly. So it really is all about having another person doubt reality, their sense of self, who they are, and what is even happening in the relationship. Okay. So to use an example, if I were to go through your phone and I saw messages between you and another woman and it's obviously sexual, and I'm like, oh, what is this about? You're cheating on me. A gaslighter would say, oh no, I can't believe you're so insecure. Like, this is normal. This is what people do nowadays. Why are you so insecure? You're always like this with me. You know, you really just have such a problem. You need to talk to your therapist. You know what I mean?
Even you just did that right now. I was like, oh gosh, okay.
It's horrible.
I think I just got gaslit. Yes. Yeah, okay. But I get what you're saying because, so if someone is flipping it back on you by gaslighting, okay, sorry, I interrupted you, but I feel like people hear that term a lot and no one really knows like kind of what it meant. So, so they've locked you down. Now they're chipping away at you.
Yeah. So they're chipping away. So that's the second phase of basically how can I ruin this person's sense of self, their identity. And that's when you'll see a lot of the emotional abuse tactics coming in actually. Okay. And then the third phase is this kind of smear campaign, I'll call it, of typically this is when the narcissist might want to move on because maybe you are no longer doing anything for them, or maybe they're just wanting to move on to the next hot thing or whatever it happens to be. So this involves them telling other people in your life that you're crazy, you're deranged, you're the problem, you're the one that's causing all the issues in the relationship. And so that's just another way of humiliating your partner, right? And gaining more control over them. And then they typically will start either having affairs or they'll move on to a new partner really, really quickly and kind of repeat the process. But it will always be a narrative of, oh, just so you know, my ex was a raging psychopath. So
from the beginning, like just to set it up. If you're someone who is, okay, I was married, he was a narcissist, I don't think any men listen to this podcast, so I'm just going to come at it from the female perspective. If you're someone who has been married and you've gotten divorced and you either knew he was a narcissist during the marriage, figured it out afterwards, and now you're, say, co-parenting with him and you're dealing with like what you've said, like all these, like he's still in the smear campaign, telling everybody like bad things about you, is it possible to effectively communicate or have a decent relationship with a narcissist?
Your best bet if you're dealing with a narcissist is to stay as arm's length as humanly possible. Okay. So the firmer and stronger your boundaries, the better, really. So there's something called the gray rock method, and it describes this kind of way of safely detaching from somebody with a personality disorder. And if you can imagine a gray rock, like an actual gray rock, it's just like this gray rock that just exists, and there's nothing to it. And that's basically how you can be with a narcissist. So that involves you do not get emotional, which I know is easier said than done, but that's a whole other podcast. Yeah. But so you don't feed into anything that they say. You keep the conversations very light, very boring. You do not share anything about your life. You basically try to be the most boring, mundane human being on the planet in every capacity. So, when they try to invite you into an argument of, oh, I haven't heard from you in a while. I'm sure your son misses you. Oh, no, you haven't heard from me in a while.
That's it. End.
That's
Just
it.
state the reality.
Right. There's no trying to change their mind. There's no trying to argue, because you just won't win. It's completely fruitless. It is such a waste of your energy. Yeah. So you really just try to say, yep, you haven't heard from me in a while. They say another jab. Okay. Yep. You're just a gray rock. If you need to put a gray rock in your pocket and hold that thing when you're talking to narcissists.
Wear it like a charm necklace around your neck. Because are they looking for that reaction? Do they feed off people's reactions to them, to their behaviors?
Absolutely. Okay. Because a lot of narcissists, their ego and their identity, it is just so fragile, right? So they always want to be the one in control. They always want to be the one in charge. They always want to be the one who has the power and control. So there's this term called narcissistic supply. Okay. And it's basically the things that you give them that feed their ego. So you're supplying them with the things that they need to feel good about themselves.
What are some of those things that would make them feel good about themselves? If someone wanted to starve their supply, what would you take away from them?
Yeah. So, it can be things like trying to compliment. This is probably more so when you're in the relationship, trying to compliment them, trying to praise them. That's one way, but also by giving them these emotional reactions too, that can feed their supply as well. Cause it's like, again, look at the power I have. So not feeding into that is just being as removed and dissociated from those conversations as possible.
Is it possible to have a healthy relationship with a narcissistic partner?
No, because I really don't think it's a genuine relationship. Because to the narcissist, it's a transactional one, right? And coming back to those criteria of what defines somebody with that personality type, it's all about exploiting you just to get what they want. They don't care about the greater good. They don't care about your feelings. So that to me is not a relationship. Right? Yeah, that is one person who's trying to just sap your energy and sap your time and sap your soul. That's not a relationship. That is a one-sided, unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah. What if it's a relationship that you, quote unquote, can't get out of, like a marriage, say? What if, or a friendship even, that you could just end? What if it is with a family member, whether it's a parent or a sibling, or you're a parent and it's with your child, that you're like, okay, I get it, but I don't want to be out of it because it's my family member. Is it possible? Because this is my actual question. Do narcissistic relationships exist the same within a family dynamic as they would within a marriage? Like if someone's a narcissist, are they that way in the marriage? Are they the same with all their family members or close friends?
Yeah, I think you would see a lot of similarities, to be honest. Okay. But I do get your question and I do work with people like this where they say my mom is a narcissist, but I'm not going to cut out my mom, right? Yeah. So that's where we'll have a lot of conversations about boundaries. So what a boundary is here's what I'm going to do to protect myself. It's not, a lot of people say a boundary is you need to stop yelling at me. That's not a boundary. That's a request. Right. Okay. A boundary is if you start yelling at me, I will leave. Okay. So those are the types of things that you can start trying. So,
and you would actually say that out loud to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So you can say, if you continue talking to me this way, I'm going to leave, but then you have to follow through on it. You can't just say that.
Actually leave.
Yeah. Right. So,
you can't stay in the fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I know people, it's so unfortunate, but their mom will be a narcissist. They drive 5 hours to go see her. She really is just right from the gate pushing their buttons, and they have to leave the moment that they got there. But that is what you sometimes need to do for self-protection.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of boundary setting that we can do. I also think it's really, really helpful to speak to a therapist or just a really, really close friend, because what I see a lot is, because narcissists use gaslighting and other manipulation tactics so much, you can leave a family dinner going right back to that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm the problem. I'm a horrible daughter. I'm a horrible son, whatever. And then people talk to me about it, and I'll say, oh no, we know that your mom uses guilt tripping. We know that's one of her strategies. And it's like, you can kind of see them come back to reality. It's like, oh yeah, this is a really unhealthy person. This is a very toxic individual in my life. But they kind of need that as validation to ground them again.
Yeah, they've just been used to it for so long.
Right, right. And you hope that over time, like something I have seen, which is really rewarding, is that people start to kind of be ahead of the game, right? It's like they know what their mom's going to do, and they can prepare themselves for that, and then they can detach from it a little bit, and then they can come to our session and be like, oh my gosh, guess what my mom did? And I love that, because it's a much different vibe than, oh, I'm like a bad kid because I just saw my mom and I'm in that hole again, and you know.
Is it helpful for someone to get therapy if they've been in a relationship with a narcissist, even if the narcissist isn't coming with them?
100%, 100%, because a lot of survivors, I'll say, of narcissistic abuse experience a lot of symptoms after leaving that relationship. Like there tends to be a lot of anxiety, depression, guilt. There can be shock. And we also can sometimes see some PTSD symptoms. So avoiding certain situations or having flashbacks or being triggered by certain things. So you really, really do want to educate yourself about what happened to you and what you can do about it, because it's awful if you've ever experienced it.
Okay. Has it always been a thing? We just it's been more trendy to talk about in the past while, or social media? Like, has narcissism always been around, narcissistic people?
Yes, they have. I think that sometimes what happens, at least this is my theory, is that there's something so validating about having language for your experience. And so I think sometimes, even if just one little part of that experience resonates with somebody, they get so excited in a way, because it's like, oh, I finally understand what happened to me and I finally have a word for it. And then they just want to go tell the world about it because they finally can share their story. But so I think that might be happening a little bit, and maybe we're just getting better at recognizing it. But I still, at the same time, am holding this reality that I don't want us to go running around saying that everybody is a narcissist.
As a narcissist. Yeah, everyone's currently diagnosing someone they know right now. They're like, oh, I knew that's what it was. But probably most people know, or at least have met someone in their life that all those things you just listed off, they probably go, oh, right. I mean...
And you can say, oh, that person's really narcissistic. Like, that's always on the table. But
that's not the same thing as the narcissistic person. So you can be narcissistic without having the NPD part of it. And
yes, and to be fair, I actually think that a lot of us are socialized to be narcissistic in Western society. Like,
yeah, for sure.
Right?
With social media, or just in general, like without social media?
In general, and I really do think that social media has just exacerbated that, because, I mean, I think to myself, how self-absorbed is it that we think that we should post about the oatmeal we had that morning and want people to care? Like, it's so self-absorbed.
And why do they care? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. But again, like, we come back to that idea of there's not really any consequence to that. Like, so what? I'm posting about my oatmeal.
You're not hurting anybody.
Right.
No one's in the crossfire. Yeah.
Right. But if you're starting to have, people in your life are so unwell because of you, or you're having, some narcissists, they might excel in work, but others might just be fired over and over because they just can't get people to like them because they're just so insufferable sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. That's been very insightful, actually. Because I do think it's like these terms that people throw around all the time and no one actually knows. I feel like I didn't know what gaslighting meant till like a couple months ago, and I'd heard it over and over again and kind of thought I knew what it meant, but it makes sense. And it does seem, I think for so long, everyone just thought like physical abuse, which obviously it is terrible, but everybody just put this emphasis on you should leave if you're being physically abused. And people didn't really talk about that emotional abuse. And I think for a long time, women really were just kind of taught that this is just what marriage was. And this is just, you just kind of take it. And, you know, especially like, I don't know, probably like past my mom's generation, but, you know, kind of back in the 50s and beyond, like those relationships probably had a lot of emotional abuse that they just thought were, this is what you did. You got married and that's what it was. So
yeah,
I'm glad it's not that anymore. And I think there seems to be a lot of more resources for women these days who do feel like they're being emotionally abused. I have one last question for you. If you find that you are in an emotionally abusive relationship, like say you've listened to this podcast and one or some or all of the things you've said are kind of like ringing true for you right now, like, is there a great way to kind of cope with that in terms of like not pushing through, but either making it better or leaving? Like, when do you decide whether you should just leave or try to stay and fix things? Is there a way to kind of know the best route to go?
Well, I would say everybody's situation is so different that if you can talk to a health professional, that's your best bet of just like from an actual professional who has dealt with this type of situation before, I can really help you out. Because
and where's the best place someone can find that? Like if I'm like, I've never been to therapy, I don't know anybody that's at least admitted they've gone to therapy, aside from just Google search bar, like how do you recommend someone find, like, as you said, like a trusted therapist that's going to know what they're doing?
Yeah, it's hard because I know Canadian resources. So in Canada, we have something called Psychology Today, which is a directory of therapists. So you go on and then you type in your location and then you can see a bio.
Okay.
Social media is another great place.
Yeah. Because a lot of people would have their own accounts.
Yeah, I mean, some therapists do, but I guess you're right. Not every therapist would. So it's hard. I only really know the Canadian ones. Like there's some that certain benefits plans are associated with that people can search. But
I'll look it up and see if I can put it in the show notes. Okay, so finding a therapist. And would you say, I always feel like everyone I know who's gotten a divorce has said, like, if it was so bad that they wish they had left, like they either stayed for the kids or they stayed for kind of XYZ and they wish they had, you know, kind of gotten out sooner. Do you have any advice for somebody who is like, this is really bad, but I think I'd rather be with them than alone?
Yeah. You know what? I always want to validate those people as well, because, you know, as black and white as it might seem to any of us of why don't they just leave, I've honestly learned that there's a lot of reasons that sometimes people stay. A lot of it is fear-based. And statistically, if you're in a really, really bad abusive relationship, you're at the highest risk of death when you leave. We're talking about when it's physically abusive and really, really bad. So I only mention that not to instill a sense of fear, but for people to sort of gain some compassion around why people stay. Because, you know, some of them are getting threats. Like I said about the immigration thing, like they're being threatened to be tossed out of the country, right? Like that's horrible. Yeah. So there's things that these abusers do to make sure that you can't leave. So if you're in that type of a situation, one thing I would definitely recommend is trying your best to reconnect with yourself, because abuse is often about disconnecting yourself from yourself. It's about isolating you, and you can lose touch with what you enjoy and forget about who you actually are. So it might sound small, but doing things that you enjoy, getting out of the house and trying to spend less time around the abuser, doing things that you find fun, things that bring you joy, just really reconnecting with who you are and what you value can be really, really helpful. I would say it can also be helpful to have kind of witnesses around when you're having, let's say you want to have a dinner, you know, invite another couple, because the abuser either might be on better behavior. B, you have some buffers during the night, or C, you have witnesses. So if they're doing things like name calling and humiliating you, you have some people who are like, that was really bad. And at least you can feel validated in that.
Okay.
Write things down in case you need them for legal stuff later, but even just for your own sanity, because with a lot of gaslighting, you start to doubt your reality. And I knew somebody who started to have to take photos of everything that basically happened because they needed to be able to go back and say, nope, my purse was in that location. And so that's another thing that you can just do for your own sanity. And like I was saying before, you can try that gray rock method of healthy detachment so that you're not feeding into what a narcissist or what somebody who's abusive needs from you. So those are the biggest thing. But I think it's so important to just connect with who you are again as much as you can.
Awesome. Well, I love that. Well, we're all going to be going home and saying to our husbands, look at that bird. And we're all going to wait. I'm going to do like a poll on my Instagram, and it's going to be like at 6:00, everyone has to tell their husband, look at the bird. And then what was everybody's reaction? I think if I said that to John, he'd be like, what are you even saying? But at least he's acknowledging what I'm saying.
Oh my God.
Well, maybe fix something. But it's true. It's because it's just that little, you're not wanting like necessarily like the roses and the fancy dinners and all these things. I think a lot of the times too, men think that that's what you want. And really as women, it's like, you just want their attention. That's all you want, is to feel like you're front and center of the world. So that's
exactly.
That was very insightful. Well, I thank you so much for being here today. Okay, so tell everybody where they can find you. I will put it all in the show notes, but tell everybody. So your website is
fresh-insight.ca. That's the name of our clinic. Yeah.
Okay, and your TikTok, which I love. Everyone needs to go get on TikTok, even if they're not.
Oh, thank you. It's at Therapy Kristina with a K.
Okay, and then your Instagram handle
is at Kristina Virro, so Kristina, V as in Victor, IRRO.
Okay, perfect. Anywhere else someone can find you?
That is all I can manage social media.
Okay, I know. I was going to say that's a lot. And we'll put that resource down that you said, and I'll see if I can find. They might even on that website have like a U.S. affiliate or something. That Psychology
maybe.
Today one. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We've all learned a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thanks, Kristina.